She had learned to survive. That was what she called it now. Survival. Not living, not building, not dreaming. Just getting through the day without letting anyone see the cracks. Vivian Chase had done something brave once. She had believed in herself, in a vision, in a partnership. And that belief had cost her everything. Her money, her name, her future. The person who was supposed to stand beside her had taken it all and left nothing but debt and silence. So she rebuilt. Smaller, quieter. She found a job, she kept her head down, and she told herself that the woman who used to dream had simply grown up. Then came the night she walked into a corporate gala and fainted. Not from weakness. From 3 skipped meals, 16-hour days, and a body that had simply run out of patience with a mind that refused to slow down. She would have hit the floor if he hadn't caught her. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know that the arms holding her belonged to the man who now owned the company where she worked. She didn't know that, in the space of one breath, her unconscious, his stunned, something would begin that neither of them had any business starting. She only knew one thing when she finally opened her eyes and found him looking at her like she was the most unexpected thing he had ever seen. He had whispered one word, just one. Hours. And for the first time in 2 years, Vivian felt something that wasn't exhaustion. If this story already has you feeling something, you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. And drop a comment below. What do you think Vivian is going to do when she finds out who he really is? The gala was held on the 42nd floor of a building made almost entirely of glass, which meant that from every angle, Los Angeles spread out below like a city-sized promise. Lights that went on forever. Highways that pulsed like veins. The kind of view that made people feel larger than they were, if only for the duration of a champagne glass. Vivian Chase did not feel large. She felt like she was held together by the sheer force of professionalism, which was, she had discovered, a perfectly adequate substitute for actual well-being, as long as nobody looked too closely. She was 31 years old. She had worked at Meridian Pacific Holdings for 14 months, 10 days, and approximately 6 hours. Her title was Senior Project Coordinator. Her salary was respectable. Her apartment was small and clean, and very, very quiet. And she liked it that way, because quiet did not ask things of her. The gala was a company celebration. The official close of Meridian's fiscal year, dressed up in $1,000 floral arrangements and a live jazz quartet that nobody was actually listening to. Vivian had considered not coming. She had, in fact, planned an elaborate excuse involving a fictional migraine. But her manager, Petra Walsh, had used the phrase, mandatory encouraged attendance, which was corporate language for there will be consequences if you don't show. And Vivian had put on her best dress and come. The dress was midnight blue. She had bought it for a different life, a launch event for her company. Back when she had a company. Back when she had a business partner named Daniel Forsyth, who turned out to be the kind of man who smiled while he was robbing you. She didn't think about the dress's history when she wore it. She simply wore it. Because it still fit, and she refused to buy a new one on principle. She had eaten nothing since a granola bar at 11 that morning. She had been in back-to-back meetings until 7. She had arrived at the venue at 8:15, accepted a glass of sparkling water, not champagne, because she had learned that alcohol on an empty stomach was a fast route to embarrassment, and had been working the perimeter of the room in a careful orbit, making just enough small talk to satisfy the attendance requirement without having to sustain a real conversation. She was 3 hours into this strategy when the room tilted. It wasn't dramatic, at first. Just a slight shift in perspective, the lights seeming brighter, the ambient noise growing distant, her own heartbeat becoming oddly loud inside her ears. She reached for the nearest surface, which happened to be a decorative column, and thought, I just need a moment. I just need one moment. She did not get one moment. What she got instead was a very sudden and complete loss of vertical orientation. She didn't feel herself fall. That was the strange thing. There was no sensation of descent. There was the room, and then there was nothing, and then there was warmth. Real warmth. The kind that came from another person. which she hadn't been close enough to notice in a long time. And there was a voice, low and careful, speaking in a language she didn't know at first, and then switching, almost without pause, to English. Hey, stay with me. The first thing she saw when consciousness came back was the ceiling. 42 floors of architectural confidence above her, geometric and white. The second thing she saw was a face. It was the face of a man she had never met. He was crouched beside her, one hand behind her shoulders, keeping her from being entirely on the floor. His jacket, dark, clearly expensive, was somehow beneath her head without her understanding how that had happened. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. Not alarm exactly. Not pity. Something more like arrested attention, as though she had interrupted something he had spent his whole life thinking about. When she met his eyes, he exhaled. Just once. And then, very quietly, in a voice that sounded like it was speaking entirely for itself and not for any audience. Nossa. She had enough of her faculties back to know she didn't recognize the word. Later she would look it up. It was an expression, Korean slang, meaning something between wow and oh my, and a sound a person makes when language briefly fails them. In that moment, lying on the floor of a 42nd floor gala with a stranger's hand behind her head, Vivienne Chase did something she genuinely had not expected to do. She almost smiled. I fainted. The words came out very flat. Are you going to do it again? Something shifted in his expression, the arrested look giving way to something that might, under different lighting, be described as the beginning of amusement. There's water, and I sent someone for food. Don't argue about the food. I wasn't going to argue. You were thinking about it. She stopped. His name, she would learn in the next 15 minutes, from a very flustered assistant who appeared from nowhere and addressed him with a breathless formality that told her everything, was Taejun Seo. He was 34 years old, and he had, as of 6 weeks prior, completed the acquisition of Meridian Pacific Holdings, making him, technically, the reason she still had a job. She discovered this while sitting in a chair someone had materialized, eating a plate of hors d'oeuvres she had been firmly handed, watching him stand 2 feet away with his ruined jacket folded over his arm, and his attention on her in a way that had no reasonable business explanation. You're my boss. In a manner of speaking. I fainted in front of my boss. You fainted. I happened to be nearby. The sequence is important. She ate another piece of bruschetta and considered whether she was dreaming. She decided she probably wasn't, because her dreams hadn't featured anything this inconvenient since she stopped sleeping well. Vivienne Chase. She offered it because it seemed necessary. Senior Project Coordinator, 14 months. He looked at her for a moment longer than the introduction required. Taejun Seo, and I know who you are. She wasn't sure what to do with that. He didn't explain it. He simply held out her bag, which someone had apparently retrieved, and waited until she took it, and then offered a quiet goodnight, the kind that sounded like a comma rather than a period, and walked back into the party. Vivienne sat in her chair for 4 more minutes. Then she went home. She ate leftover rice standing over the sink. She looked up the word, Nosa. She set her alarm for 5:45. She didn't sleep for a long time. She saw him 3 days later. This was not, she told herself, remarkable. The company had a new owner. New owners visited. It was entirely ordinary that Taejun Seo would appear on a Tuesday morning in the executive corridor of Meridian's Los Angeles headquarters, flanked by 2 advisors and moving through the space with the particular efficiency of someone who did not waste motion. What was less ordinary was that he stopped. Vivienne was coming from the copy room, holding a folder, wearing the kind of focused expression that meant she was already 3 tasks ahead in her mind. She almost walked into the small group entirely before she registered the obstacle. She caught herself. She looked up. He was looking at her with the same quality of attention he'd had at the gala. That particular stillness. Like someone who had just heard something interesting and hadn't yet decided what to do with it. Ms. Chase. Around her, she felt the air change in a very specific way. The way it changed when colleagues realized that the new owner of the company knew someone by name, and that someone was not a department head. Mr. SEO. She kept her voice entirely professional. It was her most reliable defense. How are you feeling? Completely fine, thank you. He seemed to find this answer both expected and insufficient. Completely, he repeated, thoroughly. His advisors were pretending not to be fascinated. Taejun held her gaze for another moment, then gave a small nod that managed to communicate both acceptance and skepticism simultaneously, and continued down the corridor. Petra Walsh appeared at Vivian's elbow approximately 4 seconds later. He was being polite. Vivian kept walking. I had a medical situation at the gala. Vivian, he stopped. People stop in hallways. Not him. I've been watching him move through this building for 2 hours, and he has not stopped once. Vivian walked back to her desk. She was not going to think about this. She had things to do. She had always had things to do, and things to do were significantly more manageable than whatever this alternative was. The alternative knocked on the frame of her open office door at 4:30. She looked up from her screen. Taejun stood in the doorway alone, no advisors, no assistant, just him, in the afternoon light coming through the window behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee from the good place down the street that she hadn't been to in months because it was $6 a cup. I was told, he held one of the cups toward her, that this is the kind you actually like. Who told you that? Someone who is very eager to make a good impression on the new management, and therefore very forthcoming with information. She should say no. She understood that she should say no, should cite the professional distance appropriate to their respective positions, should recognize that this was irregular and that irregular things had historically not served her well. She understood all of this. She took the coffee. He sat in the chair across from her desk with the ease of someone who occupied spaces comfortably regardless of their context. He looked at the notes on her desk. He looked at the 3-color system she'd built on her monitor calendar. He looked at the stack of files organized by project stage with color-coded tabs. You built a company. He wasn't asking. There's a difference between building and working at E, and your entire desk is evidence of someone who built something. What happened to it? The question landed without warning. She had been asked before, in various forms, and she had always had a professional answer ready, a restructuring, a pivot, a market shift, clean language for a dirty situation. She looked at him and found, unexpectedly, that she didn't want to use the clean language. My business partner stole from me. My designs, my client contacts, my operating account. He took everything to a competitor and left me with debt I spent 18 months paying off. I was 28. I had been building for 3 years. The room was quiet. She waited for the pity. She was practiced at receiving pity gracefully, at deflecting it without making the other person feel bad about feeling sorry for her. Taejun didn't look sorry. He looked like someone thinking about something with real intensity. And now you coordinate projects for someone else. It pays well. It's stable. Those are reasons to tolerate something. They're not reasons to want it. She picked up her coffee to give her hand something to do. With respect, not everyone has the luxury of doing what they want. No. He agreed without pause. Not at first. The words carried the weight of someone who knew what the beginning of something felt like, and not from a comfortable distance. She thought about asking what he meant. She decided not to. Some threads, she had learned, were safer untugged. He left at 5, a quiet good evening on his way out the door, the kind that sounded like it meant more than the words. Vivian sat at her desk for a long time afterward, holding her empty coffee cup, thinking about the word nosa and the particular danger of someone who listened. It became a pattern before either of them named it. Taejun was in Los Angeles for 6 weeks, longer than expected, his assistant explained, due to ongoing restructuring decisions. He was in the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays. On those days, At some point between 4 and 5 in the afternoon, he appeared at the door of Vivienne's office with coffee. The first Tuesday, she assumed it was a coincidence. The second Thursday, she suspected it wasn't. By the following Tuesday, she had stopped pretending not to expect him. They talked about work, at first. He moved through the project pipeline with her, asking about the systems she'd built, pressing on what Meridian did well and what it did badly. Her answers were honest, more honest than what he'd likely been getting from everyone else, and he didn't seem surprised by that. He seemed to depend on it. It was on the third Tuesday that the question came out before she'd planned it. "Why do you actually come here?" He didn't look defensive. He didn't manufacture an explanation. He simply looked at his coffee for a moment, and then back at her. "Because every other conversation I have in this building is about what people want me to think. Yours aren't. That could just be because I don't care enough to perform. It could be, but I don't think that's what it is." She held his gaze. She had a policy about that. She did it until she understood what was behind it. It had served her well in business and badly in love, and she had not yet determined which category this was. The thing about Tae-jun was that he didn't try to fix the silences. When she went quiet, as she often did, mid-thought, mid-sentence, when something needed processing before it could be spoken, he simply waited. Most people filled silences. They offered something, a word, a question, a sound, because silence made them uncomfortable. Tae-jun sat in silence like someone who had decided that what was coming next was worth waiting for. She noticed this on the fourth Tuesday, when she'd been telling him about a presentation she'd given 2 years prior, not at Meridian, before Meridian, back when she'd been trying to revive her reputation by consulting for free. And she'd stopped mid-sentence because she'd unexpectedly felt the grief of it, the specific sadness of doing good work that no one was paying you for because someone else had taken your credibility. She'd stopped. He'd waited. She'd found her way back. "Sorry. Don't apologize for thinking. It was such a small thing. It rearranged something in her." Then, gradually, they talked about other things. He had grown up in Seoul, second son of a family that had built its fortune over 3 generations. He had been educated in Seoul, then London, then New York. He spoke 4 languages fluently, and was what he called conversationally dangerous in 2 others. He had been running the SEO Group's international division since he was 26, which meant he had spent the better part of a decade moving between cities, living in good hotels, and measuring his relationships in weeks. That sounds lonely. It slipped out on a Thursday, when the light outside her window was turning the specific deep gold of LA autumn. He considered the word with the seriousness he gave everything. It sounds like what my life looks like from the outside. On the inside, it mostly looks like conference calls and time zone math. And yet here you are having coffee in a mid-level coordinator's office. Here I am. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. I like it here. She felt something shift in her chest, a small, structural movement, the way a building moves in wind. Not collapse, just acknowledgement. You should know, she kept her voice careful, that I'm not very good at this. At what? Whatever this is. He set his cup down. Vivian. It was the first time he had used just her name, without the M's, and it sounded different, quieter, and more certain. I'm not asking you to be good at anything. I'm just here. That should not have been as disarming as it was. She was a 31-year-old woman who had survived genuine catastrophe. She should not be undone by a man simply saying, I'm just here. She was a little. She didn't show it. She was good at not showing things. But on the Thursday, he brought her coffee and stayed for 2 hours, and they talked about failure. Real failure, not the polished version. She discovered that he understood it differently than she'd expected. His father had given him the international division because it was the least important one. Because the eldest son, Tae-in, was being groomed for everything that mattered. Tae-jun had built that division from 40 million to 800 million in revenue in 8 years. He'd done it not to prove something to his father, but because it turned out he was very good at looking at broken things and seeing what they could become. Is that what you're doing here? Looking at Meridian? A pause. A slow turn of his cup against the desk. And I'm looking at several things. She let that sit between them, without prodding it. There was a Friday afternoon, unscheduled, unremarkable on paper, when she was working late and everyone else had gone and she heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to find him in her doorway without coffee, without pretext, just standing there, the way you stand in a doorway when you went somewhere on instinct and don't have a prepared reason. Still here. I noticed. What are you working on? Quarterly projections for the Henderson account. I told them their timeline was unrealistic, and my manager told me to find a way to make it work anyway. Is there a way? There is, if I move 3 deliverables and convince 2 vendors to accelerate, which I can probably do, because I know one of them went to school with my manager and owes him a favor. And I'm going to use that information without anyone asking me to, because it's the right solution. All of it came out while she typed, without her looking up. When she finally did look up, he was watching her with that expression again, the gala expression, the floor expression. What? He pushed off the doorframe. Nothing. Come on, you've been here since 7. I have projections. You have projections and no dinner, and you're running on what I estimate is your 3rd coffee since noon. 4th. Her name, from him, just that. Vivienne. The way it sounded had changed over the weeks. It had started as a formality, then become a question, and now it was something else, something that had weight behind it, like he was putting something of himself into the syllables. She saved her work. She closed the laptop. On the evening he walked her to her car, she hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't announced he was going to. He'd simply fallen into step beside her when she left the office. She found herself thinking about what it meant to be seen. Not admired, not assessed, just seen. The way very few people bothered to look. He stopped at the door of her car. Los Angeles was doing its best impression of paradise around them. Warm air, a sky going amber and pink, the city humming at its particular frequency. Dinner. He held her gaze. Not coffee. Actual dinner. Would you? She should have told him she needed to think about it. Yes, came out instead. The restaurant was in Silver Lake. Not where she would have expected him to choose. Not one of the C and B scene places that people in his position usually gravitated toward. It was small and warm, and run by a Korean family who clearly knew him, because they greeted him by name without any ceremony, which told her more about him than 100 business articles could have. They sat at a table by the window, and ate and talked, and the night moved around them at its own pace. She told him about the company she'd built, really told him, with the specific details she never let herself revisit. The name of it, Chase & Co., which had felt brave and true at 25 and now just felt like a scar. The product line, the clients she'd cultivated for 2 years, the name of her partner, spoken once and then put away, the particular texture of the morning she'd discovered what he'd done, coming into the office to find the accounts cleared, her files copied and deleted, her business contacts forwarded to an address she didn't recognize. I sat at my desk for 2 hours, and then I called my mother, and then I called a lawyer, in that order. He looked at her across the table. How did you know to call a lawyer? Because my mother told me not to call the police until I'd talked to one. She's practical. She's been practical her whole life. A small pause. She was more upset than I was, which helped actually. Watching someone be angry on your behalf takes the pressure off being angry yourself. He was quiet for a moment, turning it over. Did you ever rebuild it? The company? I went to pay off the debt first. That took 18 months. By then I was 30, and I'd been out of the space long enough that my client relationships had gone cold. I told myself I'd start again when the timing was right. The timing is never right. I know that now. His hand was on the table, close to hers. Not touching. Present. What was the vision? His voice was quiet. Chase & Co. What were you building? Nobody had asked her that in 3 years. She looked at him for a moment. A boutique brand consultancy. for small businesses that had something real to say but didn't know how to say it. I had a particular focus on Black-owned businesses because they consistently have the story, but not the platform infrastructure. I was good at building the infrastructure. You are good at it. I've seen your work. She felt the heat of that in a way she hadn't felt warmth in a long time. Not attraction exactly, or not only attraction, but the specific warmth of being believed by someone who had grounds to believe. Tae-jun. She set down her glass. And what are we doing here? Having dinner. After dinner. I think we both know what comes after dinner, and I think we're both aware of the complications. The fact that you own my company. Among other things. She noticed the pause before other things. She noticed it and filed it, and did not yet know what to do with it. I'm not very trusting. I want to be honest about that. I know. I'm not saying that as a warning. I'm saying it as a fact. He looked at her steadily. I understand the difference. I'm not asking you to trust me because I say so. I'm asking you to let this be what it is, at whatever pace it needs. She thought about Daniel Forsyth, who had also been patient, who had also waited, who had used her trust like a key. She thought about how the woman who had survived that was not the same woman who had let it happen, and she thought, quietly, with the caution of someone who had learned the difference between risk and recklessness, that those two facts might both be true at once. Okay, let's see what it is. The weeks that followed were the warmest she had spent in years. Not without difficulty. There was always a difficulty. Always the voice in the back of her mind that catalogued evidence and asked, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" But warm. Genuinely warm. He learned her rhythms. The way she went quiet when she was processing something important. The fact that she was funny in a dry, understated way that required you to be paying attention. The way she talked about the business she'd lost with a grief she had never fully let herself express. And the way that grief coexisted, in her, with something that hadn't died. He called it the original Vivian. And she told him to stop being dramatic. And he shook his head. Patient. Insisting he was just describing what he saw. She learned his. The fact that he slept badly, waking at 4 with a mind that had decided it was done resting. The way he was with his team, exacting and fair and genuinely interested in their growth in a way that surprised her. The fact that underneath the authority of someone who had run hundreds of millions in business, there was a man who had spent 34 years being told what his role was, and who had built everything he had inside that constraint, and who had never, not once, broken it. She didn't know, then, what that last detail meant. She would. There was a Sunday, unplanned, improbable, when he drove her to the Griffith Observatory because she had mentioned once that she hadn't been since she moved to LA 3 years ago, which he had apparently registered and filed. They stood on the terrace while the city spread itself below them in its Sunday afternoon costume. Softer, less urgent, almost forgiving. And she thought about the person she'd been when she arrived in this city. The version of herself that had been so hollowed out she'd rented an apartment specifically for its lack of character, so she wouldn't have to feel anything about where she lived. What are you thinking? That I forgot I liked this city. He looked at her sideways. And now I'm remembering. She looked out at the basin of light and haze and stubborn beauty. It's a strange place to forget yourself. It's too loud for that. I think it's easier than it looks. He turned to watch the city too. To forget yourself. You just have to stay busy enough. She turned to look at him. Is that what you've been doing? The question landed differently than she'd meant it. More direct, more specific. He took it seriously. A long breath, and then, for a while, yes. She understood, without yet understanding everything, that this was as close as he'd come to telling her what she didn't yet know. That he had been living inside a structure he hadn't built, and staying busy enough not to ask what it was costing him. She held the city's light between them and didn't push. She had learned that some things came when you stopped reaching for them. It started on a Monday. He didn't come by the office. That wasn't unusual. He had the whole company to run, not just her corner of it. But he didn't text either, which had become usual. She sent one message in the evening, a small dry observation about something that had happened in a meeting that she knew would make him respond. He had always responded. He didn't respond. On Tuesday, she told herself there was an explanation. Time difference if he'd flown to Seoul. A crisis situation, a dead phone. She cataloged explanations with the systematic calm of a woman who had learned that panic solved nothing. On Wednesday, the systematic calm began to crack at the edges. She sat at her desk and did her work, because doing her work was the thing that had gotten her through every difficult stretch of her adult life, and she was not about to stop now. But there was a feeling gathering underneath the work. Not panic yet, but its precursor. The specific weight of someone who has started to let themselves want something, recognizing the shape of loss. She did not text again. That was a boundary she had kept carefully, even when she was with Daniel, even in the worst of that. She did not reach twice for someone who hadn't reached back the first time. On Thursday morning, she walked into the office kitchen to get her first coffee and found Marcus from finance standing at the counter with his phone, wearing the specific expression of someone who had just learned something and was trying to decide whether it was his business to share it. "Hey." He looked at her. He looked at his phone. He looked back at her. "Marcus. So, this might be nothing. What is it?" He held out his phone. The SEO group's press page was clean and professional. Corporate blue, the kind of design that announced stability. The announcement was near the top, dated the previous day, with a photograph that had been clearly taken at some official function. Tae-Jun in a dark suit, standing beside a woman in a champagne-colored dress. Both of them looking at the camera with the correct professional distance of two people who had been photographed together many times. The caption beneath was concise. SEO Group CEO, Tae-Jun Seo, and Park Enterprises heiress Park Ji-yeon are pleased to announce their engagement. The couple plans to marry next spring. Vivienne read it 3 times. The kitchen was very quiet. Marcus had taken a step back, giving her room she hadn't asked for. She handed him his phone. "Thank you." Her voice came out exactly the way she needed it to. She walked back to her desk. She sat down. She pulled up the HR portal and drafted a resignation letter with the kind of focused efficiency that took over when everything else failed. The administrative mind that had saved her before. The ability to complete tasks precisely at the moment when falling apart was not a viable option. She read it once. She saved it as a draft. Not yet. She needed to be sure. She opened the SEO group's press page on her own computer and looked at the photograph without Marcus watching her. Ji-yeon Park was 30 years old, she read in the linked profile. Daughter of the chairman of Park Enterprises, one of South Korea's largest investment conglomerates. The two families had been business partners for 11 years. The engagement had reportedly been in discussion for some time. She closed the tab. The thing about being betrayed once, really betrayed, at depth, by someone who had access to everything you'd built, was that it rewired your baseline. You stopped assuming good faith. You started looking for the structure of deception underneath the surface of things. And you became very good at it. Not because you wanted to be, but because you had no choice. She thought about the pause before other things. She thought about the way he had never said, "I should tell you something about my life." She thought about 34 years of being told what his role was. She thought about all of this with the cool, systematic mind of a woman who had done her grief work and was not going to do it again at work on a Thursday morning. She submitted the resignation at 4:30. 2 weeks in notice, professional and unambiguous. At 4:41, her phone lit up with his name. She declined the call. At 4:50, a text arrived. "Vivienne, please, I need to explain." She put the phone in her drawer. She finished the day. She drove home in the particular flat silence of Los Angeles evening traffic, with the city spreading its gorgeous, indifferent gold around her. And she did not cry until she was inside her apartment with the door locked and the lights off. Then she cried, because she was a person and not a machine, and because she had trusted him, and because she had always known, that trust was the most expensive thing she owned. She cried for exactly 37 minutes by the clock on the microwave. Then she washed her face. She made tea. She sat at her table and looked at the brand strategy notes she'd started writing 2 weeks earlier. Chase & Co. 2. Provisional. Still afraid. And she thought about the original Vivian, the one he'd named before he earned the right to name anything. She was still there. That was what she held on to. She had a plan. She always had a plan. The plan was this: work the 2 weeks, collect her final paycheck, find another position, move forward. She had done this before. She knew the shape of it, the part where you feel like nothing, the part where you force yourself to eat and sleep and function, the part where function slowly becomes habit again and habit slowly becomes living. She called her mother on a Friday night. Carla Chase was 62 and had raised Vivian mostly alone after Vivian's father passed when Vivian was 9, and she had the particular clarity of someone who had survived more than her fair share and decided that clarity was more useful than comfort. "Tell me," Vivian told her. All of it. The coffee, the dinners, the things she'd started allowing herself to feel, the photograph, the resignation. Her mother was quiet for a moment. "And you haven't heard his explanation." "I declined his calls." "How many?" "Several." "Vivian." "Mom. I'm not telling you to forgive him. I'm not telling you to go back. I am telling you that you are allowed to be angry and also be curious. One doesn't cancel the other. He was engaged while he was." She stopped. "He let me believe." "I know, baby. And I know that's different from Daniel. I know the scale is different. But the pattern, the person who presents something and withholds the part that changes everything, is the same shape." Her mother's voice was steady. "Yes, of course it is. That's what you're carrying." A silence. Outside her window, LA was being beautiful and irrelevant. What do I do with that? The same thing you always do. You don't throw away what's true just because something else is also true. Daniel was a thief. That's all he was. Tae-Jun. A pause. "I don't know what Tae-Jun is, and neither do you. Yet." Vivian held the phone for a long moment after they said goodbye. She didn't call him back that night, but she stopped declining. He called at 7 the next morning, her time, which meant it was 11 at night in Seoul, which meant he had not slept. She picked up. "Vivian." He exhaled her name like he'd been holding it. "Thank you." "I'm not." She stopped. "Just talk." And he did. He had told her his life had constraints. He had not been specific enough. He should have been specific. The engagement with Jiyeon Park had been arranged. That was the exact word. Arranged. By both families when Tae-Jun was 26. It had been a condition attached to the international division. His father had framed it not as a command but as an expectation, which was the language his family used for things that were non-negotiable. He had spent 8 years complying with things he hadn't chosen. He had accepted the engagement because Jiyeon was a reasonable woman he respected, and because refusing had not seemed like an option he was allowed to take. And then I came to Los Angeles. A pause long enough that she could hear the city behind him, muted and far away. "And I met you. And for the first time in a very long time, I was around someone who made choices like they had the right to. You had the right to. I know that now. Tae-Jun." She kept her voice level. "Why didn't you tell me?" The pause before his answer was the most honest pause she had heard from him, because I was afraid of what I'd have to do once I'd said it out loud. She sat with that for a long time, cross-legged on her kitchen floor in the early morning with a phone growing warm against her ear and a city just beginning to wake up around her. "I'm going to need time. I'm not going to tell you what I decide. I'm going to figure it out and then tell you. Don't contact me in the meantime, unless it's about the job." A pause. "Okay." "And Tae-Jun?" "Yes." "Whatever you do next, about the engagement, about your family, about any of it, do it because it's the right thing for you. not because of me. If you do it because of me, I'll never be able to trust that it was real." The silence that followed was long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, quietly, his voice shifted into something more certain than anything she'd heard from him before. "I understand. And you're right." She ended the call. She sat on the floor for a while longer. Then she got up, made herself a real breakfast for the first time in a week, and opened her laptop to the Chase & Co. Katu file. She changed the word provisional to draft. It was a small thing, but she had learned, was still learning, that the small things were where you actually lived. He flew back to Los Angeles 12 days later. In those 12 days, several things happened. First, Tae-jun had a conversation with his father that lasted 4 hours and covered decades of unspoken things. Second, he called Ji-yeon Park, who listened to him with the dignity of a woman who had not been surprised, who had, in fact, been waiting for this conversation with the particular patience of someone who had also been complying with an arrangement she hadn't chosen. They ended the engagement with a mutual respect that would quietly become, years later, a business relationship that worked well for both of them. Third, the Park family withdrew from a joint venture worth approximately $200 million. Vivienne learned this from the business section of the Los Angeles Times, which she had started reading with the intentional discipline of someone trying to keep her analytical mind engaged and away from the other things. When he arrived at her door, not the office, her actual door, her apartment in Echo Park, which meant someone had given him her address, and she was going to have words with that someone. She was wearing a paint-stained sweatshirt and had been standing at her kitchen table surrounded by brand strategy notes for the first time in 3 years. She opened the door and looked at him. He was not wearing a suit. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, the same exhaustion she recognized from people who had been through something that left a mark. His eyes moved past her to the table covered in notes. "You're working." "I'm thinking about working." "What's the difference?" "About 3 years of fear." She stepped back from the door. "Come in." He came in. He stood in her small living room with the big windows and the view of nobody's skyline, and the shelf of books organized by subject, and the evidence everywhere of a person who had been building something in private while she thought she'd stopped building. "I saw the article. I know. That was real money." "Yes." Tae-jun. She sat on the arm of her couch. "I need to understand something. Was the decision to end the engagement about the engagement, or about me?" He looked at her with the directness she had come to understand was simply how he was. "The decision to end the engagement was about me. About the fact that I had spent a decade making choices because they were expected, and not because I had examined them and decided they were right. That's not fair to Ji-yeon. It's not fair to myself. It has to start there, or it means nothing." She took that in. "Ben. And the reason I finally did it, the reason I couldn't keep putting it off, is you. Not because you asked me to. Because watching you make a choice, even a small one, with your whole self behind it, the way you eat and talk and decide things and refuse things, made me understand what I was doing with my own life." The room was very quiet. "I'm afraid." Not a confession. Information. The same tone she'd used when she told him she didn't trust fast. "Just a fact," offered plainly. "I know." "You can know that, and it can still be true." "Yes." She looked at the table, at the notes, at the name she'd written at the top of the first page. Chase & Co. Teku. Draft. "I'm going to start the company again." "I know." Something warm moved through the words, certain in a way that had nothing to do with ownership. "That's not a negotiating position. I'm not asking." He started to speak, stopped himself, started again, quieter this time. "I know, and I wouldn't want you to be anything other than exactly who you are." She stood up. She walked the 6 steps across the room and stopped in front of him, close enough to see the specific quality of his attention, which had not changed since the night he'd crouched beside her on a gala floor and said a word she'd had to look up. "I need you to be honest, not occasionally, structurally. Every time there's something I should know, I need you to decide that I should know it before you decide it's more comfortable to wait. Yes. And I need to be allowed to be slow about this. I don't trust fast. I'm not asking for fast. And if it gets hard, if there's pressure from your family, from the business, from anywhere, I need to know that I'm not something you'll decide is too costly when the math changes. He held her gaze and she saw something she hadn't expected. The same fear she'd named in herself, turned over and present in him. Because he had also put something real at risk, and he knew that risk ran in both directions. You're not a cost. A long pause. You never were. She held that sentence the way you hold something you're not entirely sure how to put down. Okay. Just that. One word. The same one she'd given him over dinner at that Silver Lake restaurant months ago. And it meant the same thing. I'm choosing to be here. I'm choosing to try. He reached out, slowly, giving her room, and she met him halfway. That was how it was, she thought. Nobody reaching alone. Nobody waiting for the other to carry everything. Just two people who had both spent a long time being braver in private than anyone had given them credit for, finally being brave in the same direction. The city outside went about its business. Traffic murmured. A neighbor's dog barked twice and stopped. Los Angeles, indifferent and magnificent, went on, Chase & Co., was relaunched on a Tuesday in March, which felt right to Vivian, because Tuesday was the day she had first seen him standing in a corporate hallway and felt something she couldn't name. The name was the same. She had considered changing it, had spent a week with a list of alternatives, all of them cleaner, none of them true. In the end, she kept it because the original hadn't been wrong. The original had just been betrayed, and those were different things. And she understood the difference now better than she ever had. The office was a suite of rooms in a building in Culver City. Not enormous, not expensive by LA standards, but real and hers. She had 2 employees, a designer she'd found through a former client, and a strategist who had been following her work since before she'd stopped working. She had 6 clients signed before the doors opened. 3 of them came through word of mouth from people who had trusted her the first time. Tae-jun was in Seoul when she opened. He sent her a message at 6 a.m, her time, which was 10 p.m. his, that said only, "First day. I'm proud of you." She put her phone in her pocket and went to work. They found a shape that worked, over the months that followed, not without effort. Long distance was what it was. A particular kind of discipline that required both people to be more intentional than proximity allowed. And Vivian had always been good at intention. He flew in when he could. She flew to Seoul once and spent 10 days learning the city from someone who knew it at depth, who introduced her to his sister and his closest friend and the particular neighborhood where he'd grown up, all with the quiet purposefulness of a man who was showing her his actual life. She met his mother once, briefly, at a family dinner that had been described to her in advance with a level of logistical detail that told her Tae-jun was nervous. His mother was formal and precise, and at the end of the evening, when they were leaving, she leaned close to her son and said something in Korean that made him go very still. "What did she say?" Vivian asked in the car, watching the Seoul streets slide past the window. A pause. Then, quietly, "She said you have good judgment. For my mother. That's an extensive review." Vivian laughed. A real laugh, the kind that caught her off guard. He looked at her with the same expression he'd had on the floor of a gala, the first night, when she hadn't known what it meant. She knew what it meant now. His father took longer. That was true, and she didn't pretend otherwise. The patriarch of the CO group had spent 4 decades building a structure in which everyone had a role, and roles were not renegotiated, and the loss of the Park family partnership had been felt. There were months when Tae-jun came to LA carrying the particular weight of a man managing 2 worlds that had not yet agreed to coexist. She did not try to fix it for him. She was not built to fix things that were not hers to fix. What she did was make sure he ate when he forgot to. And she listened without trying to solve, and she told him. Once, on a Saturday night when they were cooking in her kitchen, and he had been quiet for too long. "Your father will come around or he won't. Either way, you made a choice and you get to live in it. That's not nothing." He set down the wooden spoon he was holding and looked at her for a long moment. No, it's not nothing. Chase & Co. had its best quarter in the summer that followed. 8 clients, a team of 4, a reputation that was building the way good reputations build, word by word, result by result, not through announcement, but through proof. Vivian had figured out, in the rebuilding, that the version of the company she was building now was better than the first. Not because the first had been bad, because she was better, harder and softer in exactly the right places, less trusting and more open, which sounded contradictory but was. She had come to understand the actual shape of wisdom. Taejun flew back to LA in September, this time with no specified return date on his ticket, which was the first time that had happened. She picked him up from the airport herself, not because he needed it. He was perfectly capable of calling a car, but because she wanted to, and she had decided that wanting to was enough reason. He came through arrivals with one bag and the expression of a man who had traveled far enough and arrived somewhere worth arriving. Hi. She drove. He sat in the passenger seat and watched the city through the window, the highways and the lights and the palm trees that were somehow both ridiculous and perfect. Los Angeles doing its thing, unaware of what it was witness to. I've been thinking. Dangerous. There's a proposal I want to put to you. Not about the company. A pause. About us. She kept her hands on the wheel. You're going to propose something, and you've chosen a moving vehicle so I can't walk away. That occurred to me, yes? Smart. I have my moments. She took the 101 south. The city opened up around them. The SEO group is going to put a West Coast office in Los Angeles. This was always part of the plan, but the timeline is now. Okay. I'll be based here. Primarily. I'll still travel, but this is home base. She felt the word land. Home base. She didn't say anything. And I would like... He turned to look at her profile against the window. To be very clear about what I am to you and what you are to me. Not because I need a category. Because you've spent enough time in your life dealing with people who were unclear about their intentions. And I refuse to be one of them. She merged onto the exit. And what are your intentions, Taejun? Without theater, without conditions. The words came out the way they always did when something mattered to him. To stay, to build something real here. With you, if you'll have me, at whatever pace you trust. She parked in front of her building. She turned off the engine. For a moment she sat and thought about Vivian Chase at 28, sitting at an empty desk in an emptied office, calling her mother because she didn't know what else to do. She thought about all the days between that woman and this one, all the things she'd carried and rebuilt and refused to put down. She thought about the word, nosa. She thought about what it meant to be seen on the floor and still be seen standing up, and how rare it was, and how little she had believed she deserved it. She turned to look at him. I have conditions. I know. They're non-negotiable. I expected nothing less. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she smiled. The real one. The one that still surprised him. The one that had always been worth waiting for. Then let's negotiate. He laughed. She got out of the car. He followed. Above them, Los Angeles was doing what it always did, spreading its lights toward the horizon, indifferent and magnificent. A city that swallowed people whole and occasionally gave them back better than before. This time, Vivian thought, she would take the better. She had earned it. Every single day of it. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If Vivian and Taejun moved something in you, drop a comment below and tell me the moment that got you. Every single story on this channel is made for you. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs a good love story right now. And come back, because there is always another one waiting.